Am I audible?
Hello, hi, yes, you're on.
Hello everyone. Hello ma'am. Good evening. So today's our topic is management for PCOD and menstrual irregularities by our doctor Sritha Ashok. She is BNYS and she has completed PG diploma in traditional acupuncture, masturbation techniques and cupping techniques. So handing over to you ma'am. Thank you.
Hello, hi, good evening, everyone. First, let me just check if I'm audible. Please let me know if I'm audible.
Yes ma'am, you are audible.
Okay, great. So, good evening. I think we have around 30 participants. It's a very nice occasion to be with Own Your Growth and be a part of your platform, help you guys do this. So today we will be talking about the management of PCOS and menstrual irregularities in through naturopathy and yoga. So just give me a minute before I start my screen sharing. So can we start or should we wait for a few minutes?
Ma'am, you can continue ma'am.
Okay, great. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes ma'am.
Okay. Wonderful. So we are going to start today's session by talking about healing through PCOS and menstrual irregularities. We are going to be discussing about the road we are going to undertake through naturopathy and yoga. So before I start off, I just wanted to tell you guys that it's going to be a very interactive session since I was also a student just like one of you not very long time ago. I graduated this year in May 2020. So please feel free to ask any questions or share your doubts or concerns. This is going to be a very interactive session since I'm pretty sure you guys are all tired with many modules of webinars and presentations and so on. Okay. So we can start off. So before we start off with the actual management, I'm just going to give you a very brief introduction into what exactly is a menstrual cycle and what are all the conditions and criteria for diagnosis that we usually use for PCOS and menstrual irregularities. So you can all use the chat box in case you're not comfortable talking or getting back to me. But I want questions and it's going to be very interactive. All right. So, how long does a usual menstrual cycle range from? For a typical woman, how long does a usual menstrual cycle range? I don't see any messages. You can let me know. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay, great.
Participants can chat or they can unmute yourselves
Yes,
so
please.
that man can interact.
Please either send me a chat or a text message or you can unmute yourself and answer. Okay, so we'll get through. It's no problem. You can always answer. So a usual menstrual cycle of a woman ranges from 21 to 35 days. This is what we call one typical menstrual cycle. So in this one cycle, the first 14 days of the ovarian cycle is called the follicular phase, and the next 14 days is called the luteal phase. So the 14th day is the day of ovulation, as we all know, and day 1 to 5 is when the bleeding starts, and that's when we say menstrual flow or menstrual blood. Okay? So since we know a menstrual cycle lasts for 21 to 35 days with approximately 4 to 5 days of bleeding, how do we categorize what is abnormal or irregular menstruation? So I'm pretty sure all of you have heard something called dysfunctional uterine bleeding or abnormal uterine bleeding. There are a lot of factors that cause abnormal uterine bleeding, one of which is ovulatory abnormal uterine bleeding. So there, out of all the factors, one of it is called abnormal ovulatory uterine bleeding. So let's look at some of the irregular menstrual cycles or irregular menstrual problems that we usually see. So a normal frequency of menstrual cycle again is 21 to 45 days. Less than that is called polymenorrhea, where you menstruate much more often than you should. And more than 45 days of menstrual bleeding is again called oligomenorrhea. We categorize amenorrhea when you don't have bleeding for more than 90 days, which is approximately 3 months, when you have regular cycles. For women who have already undergoing irregular cycles, if they don't bleed for more than 4 months or for more than 120 days, then we categorize it as amenorrhea. Next, we will be looking into the change in duration of flow. Usually we bleed for around 4 to 5 days, right? So when the bleeding is continuous and excessive, when it lasts for more than 7 days, we call it metrorrhagia. And there is something called intermenstrual bleeding, where after your typical bleeding cycle of 4 to 5 days, between one menstrual cycle to the other, you might have some bloody discharge or spotting. That is called intermenstrual bleeding, and that should be taken into much more concern because it's not in reference to the usual menstrual cycle. Next, we'll be looking into the amount of flow. So we have something called hypomenorrhea, we where women secrete or shed blood which is less than 30 ml. Usually, uh, a normal menstrual flow cycle constitutes of 30 to 50 ml of blood excretion. So when there is more than 90 ml of blood excretion, this is called hypermenorrhea. So since we know all of these different types of irregular menstrual problems and cycles, let's move on to the next step of what we're going to be looking at, which is PCOS. So can someone tell me what exactly is PCOS according to you? You can tell me in any terminology, you needn't give me specific medical terminology. Please do let me. Unmute yourself, anyone? And let me know. Okay, anybody, no problem.
Good evening,
Good evening. Hi.
ma'am. Myself Janvi Mishra, and PCOS, ma'am. First, the full form is polycystic ovary syndrome. In that, what happens? A number of cysts formed in the ovary. Because of that, hypogonadism. Because of that, a number of acne produced, like hyper. Uh, Hyper hormone secretion occurs, and people suffer amenorrhea, or along with amenorrhea, dysmenorrhea is also a symptoms, and all these is comes under the PCOS.
Okay, that's very nice. Nice explanation. We've almost gotten it. So I'm just going to add a few more points to whatever you've explained. All right. So again, like you said, PCOS is called polycystic ovarian syndrome, which was primarily called PCOS because they found a few cyst-like presence in the uterus and in the ovary. So now the definition has completely changed because PCOS is a heterogeneous disorder. It cannot be classified as one particular cause or one particular symptom. Sorry, it's a heterogeneous disorder characterized by many factors, mainly of hyperandrogenism, which refers to increase of male hormones in the female body, and chronic anovulation, where anovulation refers to irregular cycles or irregular menstrual cycles, or where the ovulation process has not been completely finished. So this again is a huge process where you have around 3 to 4 diagnostic criteria to confirm a diagnosis of PCOS. So before we go into a diagnosis, I do not want to go into much detail, so I'll be explaining it very, very simple in very simple terms. But we should be knowing the factors that cause PCOS to understand how to manage it. Always remember, go to the root cause to manage a disease or a disorder. So like you can see here, there are multiple factors that factor into the causation of PCOS, like diet and lifestyle and insulin sensitivity, insulin secretion, even the environment, like epigenetic changes, the amount of androgens or male hormones in your body. It's very important to find out what exactly is the cause before you go into treating a disorder. So coming down to the signs and symptoms of PCOS. So before we move to signs and symptoms, can someone just tell me what you know of the signs and symptoms of PCOS? In very simple terms, no problem. Just let me know what you think would be the possible conclusion of PCOS. Anyone, no problem.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, ma'am.
Hello.
You're asking about the symptoms.
Signs and symptoms, yes. Okay.
Yes. Ma'am, first of all, there is a lot of hair growth, facial hair growth, especially because of the increase in male hormones. Second, the most common what's seen is increase in weight, and it's very difficult to bring down the weight during that time. Also, the menses can be even delayed for days to months.
Yes. So,
Also, there is a hormonal imbalance.
okay. You'd like to add
That's it,
anything
ma'am.
else? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for answering that. You've covered most of it. So I'll tell you why exactly do each of these symptoms occur. Okay. So usual signs and symptoms that we usually see, like she said, was irregular menstrual cycles, and excess of facial and body hair, which we call hirsutism, and also loss of hair in the head or male patterned baldness called as alopecia. You also get a lot of skin discoloration called as acanthosis nigricans. You also get a lot of acne and pimples and scarring over the face. And the very important factor is an unusual or a sudden increase in weight, which you cannot reduce how much ever you try crash dieting or walking or exercising. Somehow women are not able to reduce the weight, and that's when they go to a doctor. When they suddenly increase weight and suddenly they see all of this facial hair suddenly popping up, and that's when they usually come to the doctor. So these are few signs and symptoms, signs that a patient sees before they come to the doctor. So how do you confirm a diagnosis of PCOS? That is classified under 3 diagnostic criteria. So many researchers and doctors try to do a confounding diagnosis for a long period of time. They try to find out what exactly causes PCOS, and they were not able to figure out what only one particular cause, since there are many causes, and they weren't able to figure out what exactly is a clinical manifestation of PCOS, since there were many ranges of manifestations. So there were 3 societies or diagnosing criteria which were introduced. One was by the National Institute of Health, one was the Rotterdam criteria, and one was the androgen excess in PCOS societies criteria. So right now, currently in clinical medicine, we follow these 3 criteria of diagnosis. Each one is very simple. Rotterdam says you should have any 2 of the following 3 features. One would be a presence or a confirmation of polycystic ovaries in the ultrasound. Second would be a clinical or a biochemical presence of increased male hormones or hyperandrogenism. And the third would be any ovulatory dysfunction. So if you have any 2 of the 3, you are classified as someone who has PCOS. So this is according to Rotterdam criteria. Whereas androgen excess and PCOS society claim that hyperandrogenism is more important than showing the presence of polycystic ovaries, which shows that even if you have cyst in the ovary, that does not confirm that you have PCOS. So cysts are something that happen in a usual menstrual cycle when the follicle is not able to, be evacuated freely. That's when they form cysts. So a presence of cysts in the ovary is not the only concluding factor for a diagnosis. When they did research, they came to the understanding that presence of increased male hormones in the body is a more concluding factor into confirming PCOS. So again, the National Institute of Health also sided along with Androgen Access Society, saying that hyperandrogenism was more required. So when you have all three of these, or when you have two of any of these three, you are categorized as someone who has PCOS. So it's very important for us as students to know the actual criteria for diagnosis, because right now naturopathy is a very developing system and you might not get textbook cases anymore. Usually we receive a lot of pre-diagnosed cases where we treat as in when we receive in the hospital. But suppose you are put into task of actually diagnosing a condition or a menstrual disorder, you please be very careful with the criteria and diagnosis. Okay? So before we move on to the action management, I'd like you all to know that there are four phenotypes of PCOS, or four presentations of PCOS. The very severe one, called severe PCOS, where there is presence of anovulation, hypoandrogenism, and polycystic ovary. The second one, where there is only anovulation and hyperandrogenism present. The third one, which is most commonly seen, ovulatory PCOS, where there is only polycystic ovary presence in the ultrasonography, and they have regular menstrual cycles, and they have normal testosterone levels in the body, but they still tend to increase weight and they still get a lot of facial hair and all of that. The fourth one, mild PCOS. This is also called PCOD. This is when you have anovulation or irregular menstrual cycles and presence of polycystic ovaries. These are the four types of phenotypes of PCOS. So what exactly do we have to look into to confirm a diagnosis of PCOS? Like we've always seen, we'll have to look into an ultrasound presence of polycystic ovaries in the uterus. So what we usually do is a trans-abdominal ultrasound, but latest research and evidence state that doing a trans-vaginal ultrasound is much more clear and significant of a diagnosis rather than trans-abdominal ultrasound. So anytime you guys are going into your clinical practice, always try to make sure that you look into a trans-vaginal ultrasound to confirm PCOS. This is all from my experience that I'm slowly learning through, and please use this and implement in your practice in your future life. Correct? And to look into biochemical investigation, I think most of us know that PCOS is linked to diabetes in some way, or women with PCOS have a tendency to get diabetes, DM type 2 later on in their life because of one major factor called insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. So always rule out insulin resistance and sensitivity by checking FBS, your postprandial blood sugar, your 3-month average glycated hemoglobin, HbA1c. Rule out other uh, endocrine disorders by checking your thyroid profile. And the main important hormones that we'll have to be looking into is serum estradiol, which is estrogen, and serum progesterone. And this is the very, very most important thing. You have to look into the free testosterone level in the serum. Serum free testosterone in a woman is a very good indicator of a woman having polycystic ovarian syndrome. Also look into the serum luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone. I'm sure all of you would have learned all of this in physiology and pathology and all that. So I'm not going to go into much details. Another very interesting clinical factor is serum AMH, which is called the anti-Mullerian hormone. So this is for women who are trying to conceive but are not able to, women who have primary infertility, secondary infertility, and also associated PCOS symptoms and disorders in their body. So anti-Mullerian hormone, always remember, a very low level of anti-Mullerian hormone is always a good indicator of fertility. So that's all you have to remember. So going on, usually the pharmacological management of PCOS is usually done by giving, a 21-day progesterone pill, which is called progestin, only contraceptive pills or progestin, or even a medroxyprogesterone acetate. To regulate the menstrual cycles, a 21-day progestin pill is usually always preserved. Otherwise, most of the times, and even over-the-counter OCPs, oral contraceptives are also given. Sometimes an intrauterine device is affixed into the uterus, which is a levonorgestrel or a slow-releasing progesterone IUD. Most of the time, metformin is also given when women show the tendency of having insulin resistance and a reduced insulin sensitivity. So spironolactone is also given, which is an anti-androgen. It reduces the amount of male hormones or testosterone in the body. Clomifene is also an anti-androgen. So these are the medications that are usually given for women with PCOS or menstrual irregularities. It's very important to know what medication they are being given before they come to you, so that you can identify the side effects and manage and reverse the disorder accordingly. So once you know what these medications do to the hormone regulation, you very easy for you to reverse and identify the disorder. Right? So coming to the most important part of it, how do we manage or reverse menstrual irregularity or PCOS through naturopathy and yoga? So before we start on, I'd like to ask you all, do you think we can reverse PCOS and menstrual irregularities through naturopathy and yoga? Is it possible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
It is, right? So you guys are very convinced that we can, right? Okay. So before we start off with the management, I'd like to make this very clear. So there is no one therapy, there is no only one modality of reversing a disorder or a disease, especially when it comes to PCOS, PCOD, and menstrual cycles. There are multifactorial causes which go into the causation of the disorder. So you cannot just use one therapy or one modality, which is where naturopathic medicine and yoga come into play beautifully, because we have a wide range of therapeutic modalities which we will use in together. So for people who use only yoga, or people who use only diet as a form of reversing, might not have as much of a significance as using all of them in combination together. So what are these modalities that we use in combination? We have mainly 8 modalities that we use predominantly. So there is a difference between treating a woman with PCOS and PCOD in an outpatient clinic, where you meet them only once in a month or once in 2 weeks, and there is a difference between treating someone with PCOS in an inpatient hospital, where you have them for 10 days, 15 days, and you give treatment. So I am going to be talking on the perspective of someone where you have an outpatient clinic and when you're treating them from home, from afar, right? So the first thing we have to majorly look into is nutrition, where we look into the diet that they follow and the nutraceutical supplements that we give, that have a huge interplay on how a menstrual cycle progresses. The next thing we'll be looking into is physical activity, where yoga plays a huge role in the form of asanas and stretching exercises and everything like that. Apart from yoga, we'll also be discussing a few other exercises. Next would be acupuncture and acupressure. Like we all know, I think we have a lot of doctors who've been very successful in reversing PCOS and PCOD just with the help of acupuncture and acupressure. So before moving on to any of the following, like environmental modulation or hydrotherapy or even sleep regulation and aromatherapy, I'd like to stress on the factor of psychological guidance and support. So before we become a doctor, we have to understand how a woman or a patient feels when they come to us with a disorder or a disease that has had a huge impact on their life, not only physically but mentally, emotionally, and everything like that. So I'd like to tell you guys to always stick to your patients and always have proper communication. Keep communicating to them regularly. Talk at least for a few minutes every day, since they will need psychological guidance and support to reverse a disorder. So naturopathy is something where we help a patient do the healing themselves, right? So there's a lot going on into what they have to change and modify. There's a huge lifestyle change for them, which might not be easy if you do not support them throughout the way. So psychological guidance would be the first thing that you have to do even before you start off your treatment modality. Right? So next thing is what I'd like to call holistic nutrition. So can someone tell me what is a proper diet plan, or what way of nutrition do you think could work for PCOS?
Ma'am, there are some do's and don'ts which are to be followed. First of all, the don'ts which are uh, is that using the one who takes a lot of bakery products, sugar, and the soft drinks and starch mainly, that has to be avoided.
Right. Would you like to add anything else?
Yes, ma'am. And also the food which are rich in fiber, uh, like oats, for example, and good fats that we can get from seeds, pumpkin seeds, flax seeds, sunflower seeds, sesame seeds, and also giving the patient uh, raisins, soaked raisins in early morning helps in PCOS. Protein-based diet such as buttermilk helps a lot. Uh, Paneer, these kind of stuff. Whey water, it helps a lot.
Right. Okay. I think you've already given us a lot of information, and which is all true, which is very true. So let me just explain in much more detail of what you've just briefly told us. Okay. So when we talk about holistic nutrition, like she said, we usually ask them to avoid sugar and maida. Why? Simply because they are processed food and refined food. Refined food have nothing except for carbohydrates in them, which is why the first rule for treating an endocrine disorder or PCOS and menstrual irregularities is completely removing white sugar and maida and any kind of refined and processed in junk food. That does not mean remove all kinds of junk food. So I will be talking about that. Okay. So what we usually recommend is a holistic nutrition plan, not just one particular food and avoid the rest. We usually encourage people to consume more fiber dense food, that is more whole grains that are unpolished and not refined as much as um, you know usual white rice and maida and all of that, and more nutrition dense, which are packed with nutrients. Rather than looking into the calorific amount of a food, look into the amount of nutrients that each kind of food or a food group contains. We also look into low glycemic index foods, because again we have to tackle the problem of insulin resistance and sensitivity for women who are dealing with insulin resistance. So again, a holistic nutrition plan would include an equal combination of whole grain carbohydrates and proteins, like she said. And she also mentioned fats, which is very, very important. So the types of fat that we will be consuming should be majorly unsaturated, monounsaturated fatty acids, and polyunsaturated fatty acids. I'll be talking about this very soon. But majorly, more than this, sticking to the traditional concept of naturopathy, we should be asking them to take in more of phytonutrients, which can only come from fruits and vegetables. So the more amount of raw and clean and colorful food that you give them is the more better way of success, rather than any crash diet or any sort of diet plan or a 21-day diet modification and all of that. So again, nutrition planning would require 2-3 months of lifestyle change for them to shift from white sugar to other sources of sugar, to sources like brown sugar or palm sugar. or coconut sugar, to shift from maida to whole wheat and whole millet flour, almond flour, and all of that. Okay? So there is not one particular diet plan to follow as such, but each meal should be an equal amount of all of this. So you will have to at least make sure that they drink or eat one fruit either in the form of either raw or in the form of a smoothie or a juice, and vegetable. There should be major portion of the food should include fruits and vegetables. And then the next portion should be about consuming whole grains rather than eating refined rice, which is only heavily laden with carbohydrates. We should be looking into whole grains that are more nutrition dense with vitamins, such as millets and whole wheat. And she also mentioned talking about soaked raisins in water, which is a very good point. So raisins have phytoestrogens, normal plant estrogens that help to improve the estrogen level in the body. So which is why soaked raisins and dates and any kind of dry fruits, in fact, will help in the modification of the disorder for a much future perspective. So we should include fruits from all food groups: fruits, vegetables, grains, raisins, nuts, berries, seeds, and yes. So if we've covered seeds, berries, nuts, raisins, grains, fruits, and vegetables, then you have a complete plan where you have both carbohydrates, proteins, minerals, and micronutrients. Uh, Carbohydrate, protein, fats, and micronutrients such as vitamins and minerals. So coming to seeds, seeds are very often underestimated for their nutritional value. I think most of us do not consume seeds, or we weren't consuming seeds before we got into naturopathy or the system of natural medicine. So, which is why there is a technique which I'd like you all to start advising to your patients and family members for any kind of menstrual irregularity or disorder, or even PCOS and PCOD. This is called seed cycling. Do any of you have an idea of seed cycling or what cycling comprises? Okay, so I'm assuming a lot of
Ma'am,
people
it's
don't.
a cycle.
Is gone. All right, so let me explain it to you. So seed cycling involves consumption of 4 different types of seeds apart from the other seeds, which will help you to regulate your menstrual cycle. So before that, let me just tell you the first 14 days of our menstrual cycle is where estrogen, the hormone estrogen, is more predominant in comparison to progesterone. And the next 14 days of the cycle is when progesterone is more predominant to help in the formation of the corpus luteum in comparison to the estrogen hormone. So the day 14 or the 14th day is when both of them peak, estrogen and progesterone peak, and help in the release of the ovum. So coming to what exactly is seed cycling, it is a very, very simple method which is practiced by many natural medicine practitioners and holistic nutrition practice all around the world, and it's gotten very, very significant results in which we might not have heard about in naturopathy before, but please do and please follow this. It's very simple. So for the first day one of the menstrual cycle to day 14, as in from the first day it's you start your menstrual bleeding to the 14th day, consume 1 tablespoon of flax seeds and 1 tablespoon of pumpkin seeds. This is very simple. Why? Because flax seeds and pumpkin seeds have lignans and they have the potency to increase the amount of estrogen production in the body. These lignans are also very rich source of omega-3, phyto-omega-3 fatty acids, which are called ALA. So this will help to regulate any dysfunction in a reduced estrogen level or an increased estrogen level. So this is why you have to consume flax seeds and pumpkin seeds for the 14 until 14 days. So from day 14 to day 20, or from day 15 to day 28 also, we recommend people to consume 1 tablespoon of sunflower and 1 tablespoon of sesame seeds. So all these seeds can be either ground into a coarse form or they can be consumed as a whole. You can either add them to any salad or fruits or fruit bowls that you have, or you can have them just as raw as you can. So we do know a lot of these seeds are required for regulating a menstrual cycle, but we've never really understood which seed is for what. So if you follow this cycle in accordance, it is very easy to reverse and regulate a normal menstrual cycle. So this is called seed cycling. It's a very, very simple technique to follow. Next, we'll be looking into some important sources of phytoestrogens, which would be, I think this is a very controversial topic where soya is considered as a very huge nutrient source of phytoestrogen. It's plant-produced estrogen, and a lot of research and not articles indicate that soya could be the cause for cancer or breast cancer. Let me just give it straight to you. Soya does not cause breast cancer. Estrogen, an excess amount of estrogen, an abnormal amount of estrogen would go into the causation of breast cancer. So it is completely okay to consume soya, and it's very necessary to consume soya when you have PCOS and irregular cycles. The next could be flaxseed, which we've already seen, tofu, sesame seeds, dry fruits, and raisins. Raisins, like I previously mentioned, soak raisins overnight in a glass of water, and then drink the water and eat the raisins the next morning. Cruciferous vegetables, apart from being very good sources of minerals and vitamins, broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage, they're all very good sources of phytoestrogens as well. So take in more amount of food that helps you regulate your female reproductive hormones rather than helping you add more of male testosterone or male hormones in the body. So a lot of refined foods such as processed, deeply fried food, they all increase uh, adipose tissue in the body, which would further cause an increase in the male testosterone levels. So use more of whole and raw food is what I'd recommend as a proper diet nutrition plan for PCOS. And there is no one shot way into a diet plan. So you cannot promise a reversal in 10 days or 15 days. Lifestyle change takes its course. So a minimum of 2 months of a lifestyle change to whole food and whole nutrition food is essential to reverse a PCOS or menstrual irregularity disorder. So yes, I like to point out a few factors which are now most widely contemplated into the use for PCOS and menstrual irregularities. The first one is soluble fibers. Like we know, there is a huge connection between the gut and the brain, and what we eat and what we digest has a huge factor on our reproductive system. This is called the neuroendocrinal physiology of PCOS, which is why we should make sure that our gut is properly clean, properly eliminating. And to do this, many people, if you've noticed, many women with PCOS often complain of constipation and bloating in the abdomen, which is why you have to look into gut cleansing. And so for this, you can advise them to consume soluble fibers, resistant fibers called inulin and so on, to help them clean out and eliminate the waste matter in the gut. Next is spearmint or pudina. This is up and rising, very, very simple home remedy that you can use to help with PCOS. So pudina, boil it in the form of tea, use it in the form of spearmint tea, is a very good anti-androgen. It reduces the amount of male testosterone and male hormones in the body, as well as promote estrogen and follicle stimulating hormone secretion. So it's something very simple. Also looking into other systems of medicine like Siddha and homeopathy and Ayurveda, where they prescribe fever nut of Kalachikai and Karanjiragam or cumin seeds and hemp seeds. So all of this also plays a huge role into what we prescribe as a part of a nutrition plan. So while they give it in the form of supplements or churnas, we can advise it all directly in the form of direct human seed consumption or direct hemp seed oil consumption. Hemp seeds is something which is recently being used in Western naturopathic medicine to cure PCOS. So incorporate everything And anything that you learn and observe makes a difference, and incorporate it into your diet planning, which is more important rather than sticking to the traditional low carb diet or just the raw diet or just the fruit diet. It is very important to think of various modalities to incorporate as much as you can in a patient's nutrition plan, especially when they're an outpatient visiting patient, where they'll be following these lifestyle changes at home rather than being in the hospital and following a 10-day of juice fast or 10-day of raw diet or something like that. Right? So understand that you have to include everything and anything that are whole, colorful, and nutritious. That's about it. So coming to yoga and physical activity, can someone tell me a few asanas or a few postures that you might think that is necessary to regulate menstrual cycles or menstrual hormonal balance?
Sarvangasana and Halasana, they both are quite effective in the PCOS. Along with that, for the psychological treatment of the patient, pranayam like Brahmari, Bhastrika, and sun salutation is also recommended for hormonal balance. That's all, ma'am. Thank you.
Tanvi? Yes, I think you've mentioned most of the important asanas. So coming to yoga and physical exercise as such, apart from the physical postures and asanas and exercises, we also include breathing techniques, not just for mental aspect into treating PCOS, but also as a conscious way of including mindful breathing. So the yoga practice that we do should at least last for a minimum of 45 minutes, especially either in the morning or in the evening. So this is very important to boost the body's metabolic rate, to help to enunciate the factor of estrogen and progesterone balance. So this is something which we have to know. Any kind of physical activity or any kind of yoga would do wonders if it's done for 45 minutes every day for PCOS and menstrual cycles. So why yoga in more specification? Again, yoga is following asanas and pranayamas and relaxation techniques in a more cohesive manner in what we call the panchakosha way of treating a disease or disorder. So once we do something with conscious breathing, once we know we coordinate and exercise with breathing, that is something which automatically boosts the body's metabolism, along with making sure you're not oxygen deprived. So these are some of the asanas that are most widely used in the treatment of PCOS. I'd always recommend to start off any yoga practice, especially for women with menstrual irregularities, to start off with Kapalabhati, with a few rounds of Kapalabhati, followed by dynamic practice of Surya Namaskaras. This always gets your heart rate going, this gets your metabolism spiked up early in the morning or in the evening, anytime is fine, but always start off with Surya Namaskaras. Then, like Janvi said, we can also go into specific asanas, especially the konasanas like Baddha-konasana, Trikonasana, Parsvakonasana, all of those series combined. We can especially include Balasana, Malasana, and the prone and supine postures such as Setubandhasana, Utthita Padasana, Paschimottanasana, Sarvangasana, Halasana, and so on. So it really doesn't make much of a difference into the finding out an exact asana or a protocol for PCOS, where what is more important is to find out which asanas stimulate reproduction or concentrate more in the abdomen. So a series of these 10 asanas along with Surya Namaskara any day, which would go on for 45 minutes and which would make the patient sweat. Again, that is completely based on the patient's physical fitness and mental fitness and such. So, in combination with physical exercise, mental exercise is also very important. By mental exercise, I mean a conscious way of looking into pranayama, which is and other breathing techniques like Brahmari and Surya Vedana, Chandra Vedana. These are all very, very minute aspects of a yoga practice, but most crucial and most effective in helping to regulate the circadian rhythm and the body's metabolism. So do not ever forget to end the session or this beginner session with pranayama as such. A few specific breathing exercises would be the camel cow breathing and bridge breathing, where you breathe in Setubandhasana. You inhale and hold it up and exhale and bring it down. So, very simple breathing techniques could also help in a lot and could make a huge impact in the form of pelvic strengthening as well as pelvic strengthening with breathing. So we have something called Kegels exercises, which helps to strengthen the pelvis and widen the pelvis and also tighten the core muscles, which again help in menstrual regulation. So a combination of all this is more important rather than sticking to a particular asana, sticking to a particular pose. So select a combination that works well for you and works well for your patient. That's about yoga. And coming to the most important part about treating someone physically is relaxation techniques or mindfulness techniques. Again, like you said, or like we discussed, the psychological component of a disorder or disease is something that we often don't, look into. Which is why naturopathy and yoga, being mind-body medicine, should emphasizes on meditation and relaxation techniques. So, a woman with menstrual irregularities or PCOS is always concerned about what's going on. She's either losing hair or she's gaining weight. She's stressed about not getting her periods on time. And these factors also have a huge deal on their outlook on life. So, a lot of women don't conceive because of PCOS, or you're shamed into having PCOS and not proper menstrual cycles and so on. So, giving a proper relaxation technique is very, very important. So, there's one more thing I did forget to mention. So, when there is hormonal disbalance or dysregulation, you have a lot of mood swings and mood changes or dysphoric disorders, which you can help by practicing relaxation techniques. So, some of the relaxation techniques that have helped my patients personally, that I have used personally, would be color meditation, mindfulness breathing, something as very simple as concentrating on the way you inhale and exhale. It makes a huge difference in their day-to-day life. Also giving deep relaxation techniques, yoga nidra, and full moon meditation. So why I mentioned full moon meditation is because our menstrual cycles are very significant to the cycles of the moon. So, which is why breathing or practicing a meditation with significance to the moon also plays a huge role in hormonal regulation. Next, coming to acupuncture and acupressure. So, acupuncture being having its origin from traditional Chinese medicine. So traditional Chinese medicine states that any menstrual irregularity or syndrome of polycystic ovaries include a combination of kidney, spleen, and stomach and liver deficiency. So, kidney is the vital chi that is responsible for transporting blood to all parts of the body, transporting energy to all parts of the body. So, when there's a deficiency or a disorder, the kidney channel, the spleen, and the liver channels are most impacted. So, always, along with the traditional acupuncture points that we usually use a combination of any distal kidney point and spleen point and liver point, the three yin channels. So before we go on, I think most of us know that we use the following acupuncture points most commonly, which again play a huge important role in regulating female hormones, such as spleen 6, the CV meridian, CV 3, 4, 5, 6. We also use Shushan stomach 36. We also use Shenshu, the kidney 23. We use stomach 25, mostly points around the umbilicus and the abdomen, along with points on the leg, right? So many research articles and there's a lot of supporting evidence for these particular 10 points that are being used to increase endometrial thickness, to reduce the size of the cysts in the ovaries, and so on. So again, acupuncture is a very widely and very well accepted and very proper way of helping someone go through PCOS and PCOD. and menstrual irregularity. So I'd like to tell you all to select a protocol that would work best for your patient and not stick to the common way of pricking 20 points and 12 points. Select 2-3 points in combination together. See how it works for your patient, because every individual is different from each other. So use as minimum points as possible to get the maximum result. So that's all. There's also what I usually do is use spleen 6 with moxib. I give moxibustion in spleen 6, which is proved very efficient in regulating a normal cycle. So women who had irregular cycles, after a few sittings of acupuncture just with spleen 6 have regular menstrual cycles. So try that out and let me know. Right. Next, this is something we all know quite well. We use cold hip bath, we use sit bath, we use revulsive compress. So for people who's not sure what are revulsive compresses, is so we have a hot compress, we have a cold compress. We use the hot compress for 4 minutes and cold compress for 1 minute in the ratio of 4:1, alternatively for around 15 to 20 minutes. So this simultaneous vasodilation and vasoconstriction of the uterine vessels is what stimulates the endometrium into shedding and to produce more progesterone and estrogen. So this is something that I have seen to be where I've seen it has proved a lot of benefit. So we usually give a hot foot immersion in terms of headache and stress. So when you include a little 1 or 2 drops of essential lavender oil, that's when there is a regulation of female hormones. So try that out along with other hydrotherapy practices such as alternative compressing. It might not be possible for a patient to take a cold hip bath at home every day, which is where you can use something like a revulsive compress or hot foot immersion, something very simple that can be done at home by them to regulate their menstrual cycles. And yes, so these are the acupuncture points that we usually use for regulating the menstrual cycle. Okay, so the next thing that I'd like to know from all of you is, do you think sleep plays a huge role on how a disorder persists or how a disorder progresses because of sleep, especially in relation to PCOS and menstruation? Okay, someone says yes. Okay. Right. So, what something that we often ignore and we don't take into much consideration is sleep. Sleep has a huge impact on the way a woman menstruates and the way her cycle progresses throughout the month. So, what you see on screen is a lot of complicated terms, but let me just make it very simple for you. We have something called the circadian rhythm or something called the biological clock in our body, where a few actions or processes in our body increase by the day and decrease by the night, or a few actions or processes increase in the day and decrease by the night. This is something that is natural to make sure that we get a proper rest and the body and the metabolism gets proper rest, at least for a minimum of 6 to 8 hours. So when we do not follow a proper sleep schedule, someone else also says yes. So when we do not follow a proper sleep schedule, the main hormones responsible for proper menstruation, such as luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, have a disbalance. So usually there is an increase in pulsatile LH secretion when you do not follow a proper sleep schedule, or when you're in constant exposure of white light and bright light when you have to be resting. So there is an increase, abnormal increase in not a periodic, very irregular increase in luteinizing hormone, which again plays a huge role in its manifestation as cysts in the ovaries, where they are not excreted properly, where the endometrium is not shed properly. So sleep is something which we have to make sure we prioritize first for our patient. Always ensure that your patient sleeps for a minimum of 6 to 8 hours in complete darkness, without any exposure to artificial light or even the blue light that we see from screens and everything. So this is very important to maintain the melatonin and circadian rhythm in our body, which not only impacts the menstrual cycle but also impacts other bodily processes. So always ensure sleep cycle is right. Okay, and coming to something which is again very essential to naturopathic medicine is environmental changes. So I'm sure, or maybe most of you have heard something called epigenetics, where there is gene modulation just by our environment. So the environment has an impact on how a disease uh, manifests itself inside a body, which is why concentrating into an environment is very important, especially when it comes into menstrual disorders. So, vitamin D activation or early morning sunshine exposure is very important to make sure that vitamin D gets metabolized properly in the body. Again, as a subjunct to alternative therapy, ask your patient to walk bare on grass, which we usually call barefoot walking or mudding or earthing, which again helps in the automatic increase of beta endorphins or naturally secreted endorphins in the body, which will make them feel good both physically and mentally. So, like I said again, make sure they sleep in complete darkness, avoiding artificial blue light exposure at least 1 hour before sleep. And we have something called journaling or affirmations, which has a huge impact on the prospect of mind and body medicine. Affirmations are just positive statements that you have to tell yourself. So just get them to take a positive resolution every day. Make sure your patients always have confidence. They trust the process of healing and reversing through a disorder. This has a positive biofeedback on them, which has a huge implication on the process or disease progress. So ask them to write down their thoughts, journal their feelings, and practice small, simple affirmations, which could play a huge role in the way they heal. The next thing would be aromatherapy. This is often widely undervalued and has a huge role into how a woman's mood perceives through a menstrual cycle. So a few of the very important essential oils would be spearmint or pudina essential oil, eucalyptus essential oil, tulsi or basil essential oil, and lavender essential oil. So you can incorporate them either in the form of diffusing through candles or diffusers, or even introducing them into baths and food soaps and all of that. So try to incorporate aromatherapy as much as possible, since all of them reduce cortisol. They make sure that you feel very relaxed. They reduce the amount of stress, along with regulating many processes of the body's mechanism. So this is something that is very commonly asked. What do you do in naturopathy for period pain and period cramps and period bloating? So these are a few things that I usually follow for my patients in my practice, which I have seen show some benefit. But again, there is evidence that comes up every day, and so let's look into the first one. So when it's possible, try giving acupuncture with moxibustion at the point of spleen 6 in both legs. It sometimes, most of the times, helps to alleviate the pain that they feel and alleviate the bloating, abdominal bloating. Another thing would be drinking hot water and cinnamon tea, where you include a pinch of cinnamon powder into hot water, mix it with honey, and drink it as a hot tea. Next would be something that is very beneficial, which even I was surprised myself, where you include 2-3 drops of eucalyptus oil, mix it with castor oil. I think castor oil application on the abdomen is an age-old remedy followed by our mothers and grandmothers, but including eucalyptus oil and massaging the abdomen with castor oil automatically reduces the pain and the cramps. The uterine cramping that we usually see helps to reduce it and makes the woman more comfortable. So when your woman's having a lot of dysmenorrhea or period pain, make sure that she massages her abdomen at least 2 to 3 times in a day with eucalyptus oil and castor oil. So this is something that we most commonly follow in naturopathy, placing a hot bag or a hot bottle over our abdomen or for our back in cases of back pain associated with period pain. It works wonders, but when there isn't hot water or hot bath available, make sure that you get your patient to use any of the other uh, listed practices. So another recent development that I've learned from my patients, in fact, is something called Sirona pain patches. I think you can see it online, or it's available everywhere. So Sirona is something that's very simple. It releases eucalyptus oil and mint oil in small amounts to make sure that the uterine cramping reduces. So this is what we can incorporate into naturopathy practice as well, in the form of castor oil packs and application of eucalyptus oil along with castor oil packs and everything. So do check out Sirona and compare it with naturopathy and try to incorporate as much as you can into your naturopathy practice. So I think that this is where I am. Thank you for being a part of this journey of learning. And I just want you guys to know that learn from everything, learn from everyone, and use it efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It was such a beautiful session because you covered every aspect of naturopathy. Not just naturopathy, but very small details were also included, which will definitely help us. So thank you so much, ma'am. And if everyone is having any doubt, you can surely unmute yourself or ask in the chat box, participants. Thank you.
Yes, please do ask me any questions. Completely open to questions.
I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
What is the difference between revulsive and alternate, which is said about hot back compression?
Okay. So alternate is where, so in both revulsive and alternate compresses, we use both hot and cold. But the difference is in the time limit or the ratio in which you use. So alternate is when you, let's say we use 1 minute of hot compress and then again we shift to 1 minute of cold compress. In revulsive compress, always maintain a ratio of 4:1, where you include a hot modality for 4 minutes and a cold modality of 1 minute. So that's the difference.
Thank you, ma'am.
No problem. Okay, someone asked reason behind weight gain in PCOD condition, why the person gains weight. So this is, there is weight gain mainly because of the factor of insulin resistance. So when there is a huge complicated pathophysiological condition into it, but mainly when a woman is associated with increase in insulin or decrease in insulin production, that's when they tend to put on weight, and that's when they realize they are not able to reduce weight as much as they try. So always factor in insulin resistance as a main cause for PCOS. Right, so any other questions? Role of
Good evening.
fasting to relieve dysmenorrhea. I'm sorry, I just answered this question. Role of fasting to relieve dysmenorrhea. So fasting again plays a huge, let's say a very beneficial role into relieving dysmenorrhea, because when you're not eating, when you're not consuming very dense calorie food, you're not giving much of effort into the abdomen, rather the energy can be concentrated to the uterine movement. So fasting again has a huge significant role in dysmenorrhea, but it isn't practical to everyone, especially it is more used for women who have constipation and digestive issues rather than a normal woman with dysmenorrhea. Okay, do women have problems with delivery when they have PCOS? Are there chances of normal delivery reduced? So this is solely based on the condition of PCOS when they're out for when the baby is out for delivery. Usually, a woman with PCOS who has conceived itself will not have a problem, because a PCOS stops a normal conception or a normal fertilization. So mostly they do not have much of a problem. But again, if the PCOS is exacerbated, then they might have a problem. That's about it. Okay, can PCOS be completely cured? Okay, there is no cure to a disease, it can only be reversed. So PCOS can be reversed completely. And yes. Any more questions?
Ma'am, I
Is
had a,
yes, please.
sorry to interrupt, ma'am.
Yes, please.
Even my
Go
net
ahead.
is so that I'm hurrying up. Actually, it's my own personal thing that I have faced a lot serious mood swings, ma'am. I'm
Okay.
not able to guess, but later on I came to know that those are the mood swings of PCOD, like PMS. I used to cry a lot without a reason. I used to show the anger without a reason. Being a naturopathy student, first I have to control myself. I have started doing yoga and pranayama, but at that sudden moment, I am not able to control it. We can't move, ma'am. No, ma'am, that I'm getting these mood swings because of this. So how to deal with them personally? Because we are coming upcoming doctors, it's not so easy to deal with the patient. So how can you help me with this?
Okay, thank you, Bashmana, for asking that question. It's very important and crucial for all naturopathic doctors how to handle my mood swings and how to handle a patient's swings. So, mood swings again are very normal when they come into hormonal imbalance. So, when you're on your menstrual cycle, again, there's a sudden uprise into hormones, a sudden decline in hormones based on the days and the time impact. So when we know the factor that this is happening because of this reason and we're not able to control it, practice something as simple as conscious breathing. Just you can go into looking into smells of different flowers and fruits. You can go into just meditating for a while, just looking, observing your breath. And it might not have a huge impact initially, but along with a few changes. So the next time you guys have mood swings, make sure try to note down how your sleep cycles were the previous 1 month or the previous 1 week. So there's a lot of evidence which shows PMS symptoms in link to your sleep. If you've noticed, when you have PMS symptoms or a lot of mood swings, you're not able to sleep continuously or properly in the night. So if you can make sure, if you try to get yourself to sleep properly in the night, your PMS symptoms will automatically elevate. Again, this is because of the LH surge that happens in the night. So try that along with mindfully controlling yourself. And mood swings in while dealing with patients is when you talk to them and make them understand that it is normal to have mood swings. When you tell someone that mood swings shouldn't be happening in such a frequency or in such intensity, why are you getting so angry? No, it is completely fine because every woman goes through mood swings and hormonal changes. So get them to realize that, and along with that, teach them a few mindfulness practices along with regulating their sleep. That's about it.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
No problem. So I guess that's about it. I hope you guys learned something from it and understood from it. Okay, so hoping to see you soon. I think I've answered all of your questions. Good night and thank you.